The ambulance skidded to a halt with its lights still flashing, sirens screaming against the calm of the cul-de-sac. Inside, baby Luca was coding. A paramedic barked orders while Mila clutched her child's tiny hand, sobbing as the heart monitor flatlined. But outside, blocking the emergency lane like a monument to ignorance, was a cherry-red Lexus SUV parked diagonally across the fire zone. There was no way around. No way through. The crew leader jumped out and pounded on the driver's window, but the car was empty. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Finally, one of the paramedics screamed into the radio, "We've got a code blue infant and we're trapped behind a luxury car in a fire lane." That's when the dispatcher said, "You're not gonna believe who it belongs to." And Mila knew. Of course she knew. It was Karen. Again. A month earlier, the neighborhood's worst-kept secret wasn't a scandal or affair. It was Karen's obsession with treating every rule as optional unless she created it. The fire lane in question ran alongside the clubhouse and community garden. It was marked clearly in red, with bold letters stating emergency access only. But to Karen, that strip of pavement was her personal VIP spot. She called it her 5-minute privilege park zone and used it almost daily when visiting the HOA office, claiming it was safer than walking from the actual parking lot because her sandals didn't have arch support. The last time someone had mentioned it, Ron, the retired firefighter who had the audacity to ask her not to block the lane, she launched into a speech about how she pays HOA dues and should be allowed to park wherever she wants. When Ron warned her about possible emergencies, she laughed and said, "Emergencies don't happen in this zip code unless someone orders Thai food with spice level 5. That arrogance wasn't just annoying. It was dangerous. Jared, Mila's husband, had recently installed security cameras facing the fire lane because he was sick of watching their toddler nearly get hit by Karen's SUV as she zoomed through the community without stopping at the intersection. He'd caught footage of her once doing a 3-point turn over the community flower bed because she didn't want to go around the loop. When Jared sent the footage to the HOA, the response was pure bureaucratic mush. They said they'd bring it up in the next quarterly meeting. That meeting never happened. But things truly escalated during the community barbecue when Karen gave a tipsy, unsolicited speech about how the HOA needed to be less obsessed with enforcement and more focused on what she called peace through ignorance. She wrapped it up by saying, "Sometimes the rules are the problem, not the people breaking them." Ironically, she made that statement while parked in the fire lane, engine off, windows up, and air conditioning blasting as a kid ran by and tripped over the curb trying to get around her car. Mila, who was standing nearby with baby Luca strapped to her chest, tried to calmly point out that blocking an emergency lane could cost lives. Karen smiled and said, "You think EMTs can't just step over a bumper? That's what wheels are for, darling. They move." Jared's patience began wearing thin. As a logistics coordinator for the county's emergency response department, he had first-hand experience with how seconds could mean the difference between life and death. He knew the routes, knew which lanes were critical, knew that fire departments mapped neighborhoods down to the inch to determine the fastest entry point. The fire lane Karen blocked wasn't just decorative. It was the main ingress for Station 14's rescue trucks. Jared even told her that. Her response? "Why don't they just shrink the trucks then?" It would have been laughable if it wasn't so terrifying. That week, Jared reached out directly to Fire Chief Donnelly. The chief appreciated the heads-up but explained that without an official city citation, his hands were tied. The HOA needed to address it internally. Donnelly did send a warning letter to the board and requested that all residents respect the emergency access zone. Karen, who sat on the board and reviewed all correspondence, read the letter aloud at the next informal meeting and then crumpled it dramatically, tossing it in the recycling bin while muttering something about fear-mongering firemen. Then came the day Luca got sick. It started with a fever, then seizures. Mila knew something was wrong. She was a NICU nurse, trained to spot the signs. By the time she called 911, Luca was barely conscious. Jared was at work across town and raced home while Mila rode in the ambulance. Every minute mattered. But just as they turned into the subdivision, the rig slowed. Then stopped. And the driver swore. That's when Mila looked out the window and saw it. The red SUV. Same one. Same spot. Same entitled plate frame that said "You wish you drove like me." The paramedic leaned on the horn, but no one came. They tried to maneuver around, but there wasn't enough clearance without driving into a manicured garden and risking damage to the vehicle. And inside, baby Luca flatlined. The EMTs fought to bring him back. Mila's world blurred into flashing monitors and shouted acronyms. CPR. Epinephrine. Shock pads. A defibrillator cracked through the chaos with its high-pitched whine. Luca was barely the size of a bowling pin, his tiny chest rising and falling unnaturally as they worked on him. The only reason they made it to the hospital at all was because a neighbor sprinted out with bolt cutters and a tow chain, attached it to a street lamp, and physically dragged Karen's Lexus out of the way with his pickup. At the hospital, Luca was stabilized, but not without consequence. He'd suffered oxygen deprivation. The doctors couldn't yet say what the long-term effects might be. Mila sat next to his bed with tears streaking down her cheeks while Jared paced the hallway, fists clenched and eyes locked on his phone. The dashcam had captured everything. That evening, while Karen was sipping sangria by her backyard koi pond and planning her next HOA newsletter about lawn gnome regulations, Jared hit upload. The video showed it all. The blocked lane, the parked car, the flashing lights, the EMTs trying and failing to get through, and finally the wrenching audio of a mother screaming as her baby slipped away. The title of the post? This is what happens when you think fire lanes are optional. Within hours, it spread. First through the neighborhood Facebook group, then Reddit, then local news. Karen's name wasn't in the title, but everyone knew. Her car was iconic in the worst way. By morning, it was national. Hashtags trended. Memes were made. And Karen, who had always believed she was untouchable, was about to learn just how many people were done letting her write the rules. Because when a baby codes in an ambulance and you're the reason, no HOA board on earth can save you from what comes next. Before the world knew her as the woman who blocked a dying baby's ambulance, Karen was already infamous among the neighborhood. The locals joked that the HOA might as well be called Karen's Kingdom Association, because she ran it like a petty monarchy. Everything had to pass through her. Landscaping schedules, mailbox paint colors, even how many kids were allowed in the community pool at once. If someone dared to challenge her, she'd smile, nod, and then, coincidentally, send a fine to their mailbox 3 days later for some invented violation like misaligned house numbers or non-regulation mulch. Her reign had gone mostly unchecked because nobody wanted to fight with her. She was relentless, petty, and had a way of weaponizing bureaucracy like a sharpened letter opener. But behind the scenes, complaints were piling up like rotting garbage no one wanted to touch. Jared had long suspected that it would take something catastrophic before the HOA or city would hold her accountable. He'd seen how warnings were ignored. His camera footage, no matter how damning, was always met with the same reply: "Thank you for your submission, we'll review and escalate appropriately." But nothing ever came of it. When he and Mila moved into the neighborhood, they were charmed by the manicured lawns and community event. But it didn't take long to notice the cracks beneath the surface, cracks mostly shaped like one woman's ego. She treated neighborhood rules like her personal buffet. She picked what she liked, ignored what she didn't, and bullied anyone who challenged her. Her red Lexus wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of her entitlement. Jared had documented 6 separate occasions in the span of 3 months where she blocked fire lanes, parked in handicapped spots, or double-parked during HOA meetings because, in her words, "I'm conducting board business, so technically it's for the greater good." The fire lane incident wasn't a one-off mistake. It was a pattern, one that residents had grown used to, some too scared to speak, others too tired to bother. Ron, the retired firefighter, had tried the diplomatic approach, chatting with her during one of the board meetings about safety code. She interrupted him mid-sentence, handed him a printout of HOA regulations she'd personally updated, and said, "I think you'll find these more current than your outdated fire manual." The irony was staggering. Ron had served 30 years in urban fire response. Karen had once taken an online certificate course in event planning. But in the HOA's eyes, she was the expert, because she never shut up, and no one else wanted the spotlight. Her hold on the board was partly due to sheer exhaustion. The other members were mostly volunteers, retired, passive, or just trying to keep their lawns neat and their lives quiet. Karen did the opposite. She thrived on noise, control, and chaos disguised as leadership. Every meeting she chaired became a monologue. Every disagreement became personal. She referred to residents by lot numbers, not names, and corrected people who used nicknames in official correspondence. The culture she built was one of fear and fake smiles. There was one notable exception. Susan, the board secretary, who had silently been collecting her own record of Karen's misdeeds. She was an older woman, soft-spoken and perpetually overlooked, but she had a steel trap memory and a drawer full of neatly organized documentation. She didn't confront Karen often, but when the ambulance incident went viral, she was ready. While the news anchors replayed the dashcam footage and Reddit exploded with comments, Susan printed out her files and walked them down to the office of Councilman Hayes, whose district included their neighborhood. Susan knew him from a community cleanup program and figured this might finally qualify as the moment someone outside the HOA would care. She dropped the folder on his desk and said, "This isn't just a fire lane problem. It's a liability waiting to implode." Meanwhile, Mila and Jared were navigating a very different kind of storm. The doctors were hopeful but cautious. Baby Luca had stabilized, but only after aggressive treatment. An MRI was pending. Mila didn't leave his side except to shower. Jared split his time between watching Luca sleep and answering media requests. The footage from their dashcam had made them unlikely public figures, though Jared tried to stay anonymous for the sake of their child. Still, the public had a name to latch onto, Karen. Her first name became a meme. Her SUV became a warning. And her smirking HOA profile photo was plastered over news segments like a wanted poster. Strangers on the internet were outraged. EMTs and firefighters across the country commented in support. Even a late-night host joked that Karen's Lexus was more dangerous than a tornado in a trailer park. But not everyone found it funny. Karen's family began receiving calls. Her husband, who rarely attended HOA functions and mostly kept to himself, was blindsided by the attention. Her adult daughter deactivated social media. But Karen herself? She doubled down. She posted a lengthy message on the HOA forum claiming she was being targeted by a digital mob and suggested she might seek legal action against Jared and Mila for defamation. That move backfired spectacularly. A tech-savvy neighbor archived her post and shared it with a local news outlet. When the station ran a segment about her defamation post and juxtaposed it with the video of EMTs shouting code blue behind her parked car, public opinion hit a new level of fury. And then came the fire department's response. Chief Donnelly, who had remained calm until that point, held a press conference flanked by emergency responders. He didn't mention Karen by name, but he looked directly into the camera and said, "Blocking an emergency lane isn't an inconvenience. It's a choice. And when that choice delays care by even a minute, it becomes a matter of life and death." The crowd of reporters nodded solemnly. That clip went viral too. And it hit the HOA board like a brick. An emergency meeting was called. Residents demanded change. A petition to remove Karen from her board position gained hundreds of signatures in a single day. At the meeting, neighbors stood up one by one and told stories, small things that added up to a pattern. A father whose son's wheelchair ramp was denied approval. A single mother fined for planting tulips that didn't match HOA guidelines. A teacher cited for hanging a "thank you" banner for essential workers. One by one, the residents exposed the rot. The final blow came when Ron read a prepared statement and placed an actual fire helmet on the podium. He ended with, "You ignored every warning. Now a child almost died. You can't park your car in a fire lane and pretend you didn't light the match." Karen didn't speak. She just sat there, her usual smirk replaced with a twitchy jaw. When the vote was called, the board voted 4-1 to remove her. The one dissenting vote? Hers. It was over. For now. But the damage had already been done. And even though the residents felt a moment of relief, no one believed Karen would go quietly. She still lived in the neighborhood. She still had allies. And she had just become the most hated name on the internet. Jared knew it wasn't finished. Mila knew it wasn't finished. And somewhere, behind her closed blinds, Karen was already plotting how to rewrite her story. Because people like her didn't believe in consequences. Not until they showed up with legal documents and a spotlight. And both were coming. Fast. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and soft rubber soles. Mila sat beside the crib, watching the gentle rise and fall of Luca's chest. The wires, tubes, and sensors made him look like a machine more than a baby. She hadn't slept more than an hour since they arrived. Each beep of the monitor felt like a test, each sigh from the doctors like a new verdict. Luca was alive, but the word stable didn't mean safe. It meant he was still here, still fighting. The neurological team had ordered an MRI and an EEG. The results would take time. Time felt unbearable. Time had nearly been their enemy. Jared paced outside, unable to sit, unable to rest. He had fielded another 3 media calls this morning alone. News vans were still parked across from their house, and his phone buzzed constantly with texts, emails, and social media alerts. The video had gone global. Fire departments from as far away as Australia had shared it with captions like "This is why we enforce fire lane laws." Reddit threads debated how this could happen. Activists used the footage to rally for stricter community enforcement laws. But none of it felt like justice yet. The one person responsible, the one who blocked the lane, had still not apologized. Worse, she seemed incapable of even understanding what she'd done. The morning after the emergency meeting, where Karen was voted off the board, she posted a video. It wasn't an apology. It was a monologue filmed from her porch, complete with a glass of wine and her koi pond babbling behind her. She said she was the victim of online hysteria, that context was being ignored, and that parking incidents should not be tried in the court of public opinion. Then she ended it with, "My car may have been in a marked lane, but blame doesn't bring health back to a child." It was tone-deaf. It was infuriating. And it backfired. Again. Comment sections exploded. Screenshots of the video spread just as fast as the dashcam footage had. One user commented, "She just compared a baby's medical emergency to a parking mistake like she forgot to pay for street parking, not block an ambulance." Another wrote, "This woman is a living no regrets bumper sticker." Someone created a meme comparing her to famous movie villains. Hers featured a red Lexus and the words, "Death Lane Diva." Karen disabled comments shortly after. Then she deleted the video. But it was too late. The internet doesn't forget. And neither did the neighborhood. Back at the hospital, Mila finally let herself rest, if only for minutes at a time. She dreamt in flashes. Beeping machines. Crying babies. The sound of sirens that couldn't move. When she awoke, Jared was gone. He'd gone to meet with Councilman Hayes and Fire Chief Donnelly. They'd requested a sit-down, and Jared didn't hesitate. In a quiet room near the chief's office, they showed Jared an internal memo. It listed every instance in the past 6 months where emergency access had been delayed or hindered in residential areas. The memo had one section circled in red. Multiple delays reported in Oak Ridge Meadows. Same property, same vehicle, license plate registered to a Karen E. Jared didn't know whether to feel vindicated or furious. Chief Donnelly leaned forward and said, "It's not just your son. It's systemic. But you lit a fire under the city council, and now people are paying attention. The councilman explained that the city was drafting a proposal to implement stricter penalties for blocking emergency access in HOA communities. Fines would start at $10,000. Repeat violations would be criminal. But what they needed now was Jared's cooperation. A formal statement. Testimony. He agreed before they finished asking. By the time Jared returned to the hospital, news had already broken. His name was now in the headlines. Father of baby in ambulance delays speaks to city leaders. Reporters camped outside the hospital, hoping for a photo, a quote, anything. Mila refused interviews. She only cared about Luca. But Jared understood the importance. This was bigger than one baby. It was about every second lost in every emergency because someone thought their convenience mattered more than a stranger's life. While the media firestorm grew, the HOA found itself under siege. Residents were furious, not just at Karen, but at the years of silent complicity. Past board members who had resigned began coming forward with stories of how Karen manipulated votes, silenced opposition, and rewrote bylaws to suit her needs. One former treasurer admitted Karen pressured him to erase fines from her own account. Another claimed she rigged ballot counts for board positions by intimidating volunteers. The deeper they dug, the worse it got. Susan, the quiet secretary who had once walked those folders to the councilman, became the unlikely hero of the neighborhood. She organized a community meeting without any official HOA involvement. She booked the town center hall, hired off-duty officers to manage crowds, and invited fire officials to speak. The turnout was massive. Families brought lawn chairs. Firefighters gave safety demonstrations, and Jared took the stage with his statement in hand. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just told the truth. About the day Luca nearly died. About what it felt like to watch professionals try to save his son while trapped behind an SUV. About the moment he realized the person responsible wasn't just ignorant, she was untouchable. And how that had to change. After the meeting, people lined up to thank him. Elderly residents, teenagers, parents with strollers. A fire captain's wife hugged him and whispered, "You gave voice to what we go through every day." One man shook his hand and said, "I used to think HOAs were just annoying. Now I see how dangerous they can be when the wrong person's in charge." Karen didn't attend the meeting. But she sent a cease and desist letter to Susan the next day, claiming defamation. Susan posted the letter to the neighborhood Facebook page with the caption, "I'm old, not stupid." The reactions were instant. People offered to pay her legal fees. A local attorney offered to represent her pro bono. And Karen, once the queen of her little suburban castle, found herself completely isolated. Even Karen's own husband, a quiet man named Roy who worked remotely and rarely attended community events, began to distance himself. A neighbor reported seeing him quietly remove her name from the mailbox. Another said they watched him repaint the curb outside their house, covering the Karen's reserved parking label she'd stenciled on herself months earlier. Word spread that he'd filed for legal separation and moved into a short-term rental nearby. For once, Karen was quiet. No HOA rants, no porch videos, just silence. Some said she was hiding out at a sister's house 2 towns over. Others claimed she was consulting a PR firm to clean up her image. But no one saw her. Not at the grocery store. Not at the park. Not even through her window blinds. Jared and Mila stayed focused on Luca. The MRI results came back with hopeful news. Minor delays, but nothing irreversible. Doctors believed with therapy, he'd catch up. Mila cried for the first time in days, real tears of relief. Jared sat beside her and said, "We're not just healing him. We're fixing something bigger." Mila nodded, knowing it was true. But neither of them knew that across town, in a tiny law office, a junior clerk was filing paperwork with the city on behalf of Jared and Mila. Paperwork that would set in motion the next phase, a civil suit. Not for fame, not for money, but for change. Because apologies weren't enough. Not when a fire lane was treated like a convenience store parking lot. And not when a baby had to stop breathing to make anyone finally pay attention. The lawsuit hit the HOA office like a bomb. It came in a thick envelope hand-delivered by a court officer who asked for Karen by name, only to be told by the receptionist that she had officially resigned and hadn't been seen in weeks. The officer shrugged and handed the papers over anyway, informing the receptionist that Karen was still legally listed as the board's chief officer of operations at the time of the incident. That meant she was still on the hook. By noon, the news had already made its way to every mailbox in the neighborhood, thanks to a few eager residents who printed out the public court filing and started passing it around like a holiday newsletter. People gathered on porches, driveways, and corners, whispering about the lawsuit's details. It wasn't just against Karen. It was against the HOA as a governing body. Jared and Mila were suing both. The complaint was serious. Negligence, reckless endangerment, failure to enforce safety regulations. It outlined in detail how Karen's repeated violations of emergency access had been documented, reported, and ignored. It also cited the HOA's unwillingness to take action after multiple warnings from residents and emergency officials. But what truly made the case powerful was the footage. The video had already gone viral, but in a courtroom, it became something else entirely. It became evidence, not just for the world to gawk at, but for a judge to weigh. The audio of paramedics screaming for access while a child flatlined in the back of their vehicle was now part of the official record. And for every second of that video, a case was building that someone had to be held accountable. Karen, meanwhile, reappeared with all the subtlety of a thunderstorm. She returned to her home late one night, long after sunset, pulling into her driveway with the headlights off. Neighbors noticed immediately. A few even filmed her arrival, not to harass but to document. No one knew what she might try next. In the past, Karen's tactics had ranged from passive-aggressive newsletters to direct retaliation, like fining someone for a lawn ornament 2 inches too tall. Now that the power she once held was gone, the neighborhood expected either a breakdown or a blow-up. What they got instead was worse: silence. She didn't respond to the lawsuit publicly. No statements, no videos, no angry emails, just silence. She removed her Lexus from the street, parked it inside her garage, and stopped attending any HOA meetings. But she didn't move out. She didn't sell. She simply stayed inside, blinds drawn, lights off by 8, and no sign of the once blustering tyrant who loved being the center of attention. It unsettled people. For the first time, Karen wasn't predictable, and that made her dangerous in a new way. While Karen tried to disappear, the HOA scrambled to salvage its reputation. The board, now under new leadership, called an emergency meeting to address the lawsuit. Susan, the soft-spoken secretary who had become the unlikely face of reform, led the charge. She stood before a crowded clubhouse and read the board's official statement. They accepted responsibility for failing to enforce their own rules. They admitted that multiple violations had gone unpunished, and they publicly apologized to Jared, Mila, and their son. The crowd applauded, not because they were happy, but because they were finally heard. For the first time, the HOA didn't hide behind bylaws or legalese. They stood up and owned it. But owning it wasn't enough to stop the legal process. Depositions began the following week. Jared was questioned for nearly 4 hours by HOA attorneys, who tried everything to shift blame. They asked if he had ever blocked the lane himself. He hadn't. They asked if Luca had pre-existing conditions. He didn't. They asked why he didn't drive Mila and the baby himself instead of relying on an ambulance. Jared calmly explained that when your baby starts convulsing in your wife's arms, you don't waste time arguing about cars. You call 911 and pray they get there fast. The lawyers had no response. Karen was subpoenaed next. She tried to delay, citing health concerns and stress-related anxiety. But the judge denied her request. The day she arrived for her deposition, she wore oversized sunglasses and a scarf over her head, as if she were avoiding paparazzi. But there were no flashing cameras. Just court staff, legal teams, and a very quiet room. Her deposition was brief and defensive. She claimed she didn't know it was a fire lane. The video showed otherwise. She claimed she only left her car there for 2 minutes. The timestamp proved it was over 20. She claimed no one had ever warned her. The records showed 6 written notices, 3 board discussions, and a hand-delivered fire department letter. Her words collapsed under the weight of reality. Back in the neighborhood, changes were happening fast. The fire lane was repainted in bold, fluorescent yellow with a reflective surface that lit up under headlights. Bollards were installed to prevent unauthorized parking. Signs were upgraded. The city even agreed to fund motion-triggered cameras tied to the fire department's dispatch center. It was overkill to some. To others, it was long overdue. But the real transformation wasn't the asphalt or metal poles. It was in the people. Neighbors started speaking up. Old grievances were aired and addressed. The culture of fear Karen had nurtured was replaced by something rare in HOA communities: collaboration. Then came the community's boldest move yet. Jared and Mila, still receiving nationwide support and donations from strangers, decided to use a portion of the funds to start a foundation in Luca's name. It would be dedicated to improving emergency response infrastructure in residential neighborhood. Their first initiative? Partnering with the fire department to develop a new neighborhood rating system. One that measured not just aesthetic compliance but actual safety. The program would reward communities for maintaining clear access lanes, proper signage, and resident education. The city agreed to pilot the program in their neighborhood. What was once a source of shame became a proving ground for reform. As the legal case moved forward, Karen's name continued to circulate online. But now it was part of court documents, not just comment threads. And while her image had become a cautionary tale, the real weight of consequence was financial. Her insurance premiums skyrocketed. Her personal legal fees mounted. And the city was considering criminal charges under newly proposed legislation for repeat violators of emergency protocols. She had gone from HOA royalty to a liability in every sense. But perhaps the most unexpected consequence came not from a lawyer or a judge, but from her own neighbors. During a monthly community cleanup event, someone quietly removed the engraved plaque Karen had installed by the clubhouse 2 years earlier. It had read, "Dedicated to Order and Excellence, Karen E." In its place, someone laid a new plaque. This one read, "Dedicated to Safety and Compassion in Honor of Luca." No one claimed credit. No one argued. And no one asked the board for permission. That afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the treetops and children played near the clubhouse, Jared and Mila walked hand in hand with Luca in a stroller. He was smiling, clutching a plastic fire truck toy one of the EMTs had given him. They passed the new plaque. Mila stopped for a moment, took a deep breath, and said, "Maybe this place really is changing." Jared nodded and said, "It took a lot. But maybe now they understand why fire lanes matter more than garden rules." In the distance, Karen's house stood quiet. No lights. No music. No HOA memos on windshields. Just shadows behind closed blinds. Whatever plans she once had, they were buried now under lawsuits, reforms, and the weight of truth. And as the community moved forward, Karen became a footnote. A reminder of what happens when power is abused, and how quickly it can vanish when people finally decide enough is enough. The courtroom was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of papers shuffling as attorneys prepared their note. Jared sat beside Mila, their fingers intertwined, as they waited for the judge to return from recess. In front of them sat the defense team for the HOA and Karen's separate attorney, who had barely spoken since proceedings began. Karen herself sat 2 rows back, arms folded, eyes scanning the ceiling as if the fluorescent lights were more important than the people she had wronged. She looked smaller now, not just physically, but in presence. Gone was the dominating woman who once barked orders across community meetings like a general. In her place sat someone unraveling, quietly but unmistakably, thread by thread. The civil case had moved quickly, expedited by the media attention and overwhelming public interest. The evidence was damning, and not just the dashcam footage. Emails, memos, and sworn testimonies from multiple neighbors painted a crystal-clear picture of neglect and ego. Jared had sat through every moment, never raising his voice, never showing anger. Just facts. Mila had spoken only once, when the lawyer asked her to describe the moment her son stopped breathing. Her voice had cracked, but she stayed composed. She didn't want pity. She wanted accountability. That was the word she kept coming back to. Accountability. The one thing Karen had never faced. When the judge returned, everyone stood. He was an older man with a weary expression that came from years of seeing people fight over fences, parking spaces, and property lines. But even he had admitted during pre-trial motions that this case was different. This wasn't about noise complaints or overgrown hedges. This was about negligence that nearly cost a life. As he began reading his judgment, the courtroom held its breath. The ruling was firm and clear. The HOA was found liable for failing to enforce safety regulations and ignoring repeated warnings. They were ordered to pay damages, most of which would go directly into the newly established emergency access reform fund Jared and Mila had created. Karen was held personally responsible for her actions, both in blocking the fire lane and in creating a culture of noncompliance. She was fined and ordered to pay a portion of the legal fees, along with a formal written apology to the family, to be reviewed and approved by the court. It was a rare move, but the judge made it clear. Her behavior was not just reckless, it was morally bankrupt. Karen didn't speak as the judgment was read. She sat still, jaw clenched, and when it was over, she stood and walked out of the courtroom without looking at anyone. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the sound of her heels on the tile floor fading into silence. But for Jared and Mila, it was enough. Not because the money mattered. It never had. But because the truth had been spoken in a space where it counted. In front of a judge. In front of their peers. In front of the very community Karen had tried to control. Back in the neighborhood, things continued to shift. The HOA underwent a complete structural reorganization. New bylaws were written with help from legal advisors and fire safety officials. Monthly town halls replaced the old, closed-door meetings. Residents who had previously avoided involvement now found themselves volunteering for committees and attending events. It was as if the community had taken a long, deep breath after years of holding it in. The fear was gone. The hesitation had been replaced with a kind of shared pride. They weren't just a group of houses anymore. They were a neighborhood again. One weekend, a block party was organized, not by the board but by the residents themselves. The theme was safety and solidarity. Firefighters were invited to give demonstrations. EMTs brought a display ambulance for kids to explore. A new mural was unveiled near the clubhouse, painted by local teens. It featured a fire truck, a clear emergency lane, and a family holding hands beneath the words, "Every second counts." Mila stood before it, holding Luca in her arms. He was smiling, babbling, and reaching toward the painted truck with a finger that still had a hospital band wrapped around it. She kissed the top of his head and whispered, "You saved a lot more lives than your own, little man." Jared, now something of a local hero, was approached by community leaders from nearby towns asking if he would help replicate their reform model. He agreed on the condition that any neighborhood adopting it had to include actual emergency responders in the planning. No more policy without practice. He refused any compensation, redirecting all offers to the foundation. When one HOA president asked him how they could prevent a Karen situation, he replied, "By making sure you never let one person think they're more important than everyone else combined." Karen, for her part, all but vanished from public life. Her house went up for sale quietly, the sign appearing overnight with no open house notice. A few neighbors saw her loading up a rental van one morning, flanked by movers and what appeared to be a very tired lawyer. No goodbyes, no notes, just a silent exit, which was perhaps the only grace she was ever capable of showing. Some said she moved to another state. Others claimed she changed her last name. But no one went looking. Her chapter in the neighborhood was closed. In the weeks that followed, Luca's health continued to improve. The therapies worked. He began to crawl, then walk, then run. Each milestone was celebrated quietly by Mila and Jared, not as a victory over Karen, but as a victory over the fear that had once consumed them. They had turned their trauma into change. They had taken the worst moment of their lives and built something meaningful from its wreckage. On the anniversary of the incident, the fire chief held a short ceremony in the neighborhood. He unveiled a new community award named after Luca. It would be given annually to residents who showed exceptional commitment to safety and community welfare. Jared and Mila were the first recipient. As they stood on the small stage in front of friends and neighbors, the chief handed them the plaque and said, "This neighborhood was lucky that night. Not because someone finally paid attention, but because someone didn't stop until the world did." That night, as the sun dipped below the rooftops and the streets filled with laughter and food trucks, Mila and Jared sat on their porch with Luca playing at their feet. They watched as neighbors waved to one another, as kids rode bikes through the now permanently clear fire lane, and as an ambulance rolled slowly through the street, not in crisis but as part of the event. Its siren was off, its windows were down, and its driver, spotting Jared, gave a small salute before continuing down the road. Mila leaned into Jared's shoulder and whispered, "Do you think it was worth it? All of it?" Jared didn't answer right away. He looked at their son, who was now chasing a balloon across the yard, laughing so hard he could barely stand. Then he said, "It's worth it every time I hear him laugh." The neighborhood had learned a lesson the hard way. But it learned. And now it stood not just as a reminder of what went wrong, but as a testament to what can go right when people refuse to stay silent, when they demand accountability, and when they remember that community means protecting one another. Especially when it matters most.